all black everything, all black, you know, all black in the name of all my black heroes, all black everything, all black polos, all black medallions, yeah, all black, yo.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. Here we are in our 13th season in collaboration with the John Hope Franklin Humanities Institute, and we're happy to join with us today Ayana Contreras, who is a radio host, producer, Chicago Public Radio, a founder of darkjive.com, and a columnist and reviewer at Downbeat Magazine, most well known perhaps as the host of Reclaimed Soul, which appears on WBEZ and also Vocala Radio in Chicago. She's talking to us today about her new book, Energy Never Dies, Afro-Optimism and Creativity in Chicago, published by our friends at the University of Illinois Press in 2021. Of Energy Never Dies, the great Jacqueline Stewart writes, in Energy Never Dies, Ayana Contreras crafts an intensely intimate and loving portrait of Black Chicago that will illuminate, even to lifelong South and West Siders, the distinctiveness of our cultural history and worldview. The book offers urgently needed blueprints for extending the work and actualizing the dreams of the great migrants. How are you doing today, Ayana?
I'm good. I mean, I don't know if I can outspeak that. That's that back of the book, man. They all killed the game with that.
Oh, absolutely. They gave you the hookup, no doubt about that. Talk a little bit about how you got to this book, particularly the energy, the title, Energy Never Dies. Talk a little bit about that title.
So, you know, the book itself, there was a lot of work that went to it, most of it being from the show Reclaimed Soul, where I'm interviewing these people, young and old, artists and creatives alike, coming out of Chicago. And what I realized was they were having a conversation with each other without having a conversation with each other, if that makes sense. It was really obvious that especially the ones that came up in the 60s, 70s had this sort of forward-leaning conception of what it meant to be Black and what it meant to contribute to society. And these younger folks, same, right? And these younger folks were so inspired by what came out of this, you know, culture, this Black culture here, that they felt that they were a continuation of that. The title itself, though, came later, actually, in the process of the book. I sat down with my family in Chatham, and my grandmother gathered us around, and she told us that she had stage 4 cancer. And I was sitting next to her, and everybody else was sort of standing around. And if anybody is a continuation, if there's anybody who I think of myself as a continuation of it, it's her. She's also from that 60s, 70s kind of like hip generation that talks about people going through changes, like that sort of person. And so when she said that, she and I were just kind of sitting there quiet. And finally, someone in my family just blurts out, like, why aren't you all upset? You all should be really mad and blah, blah, blah. And so my grandmother goes, well, you know, energy never dies.
Oh.
So that's actually where the title came from.
Wow, that's an incredible gift.
Yeah.
You throw down an intellectual gauntlet, though you have the backing of Chicago creatives, to defend you. But this idea of Afro-Optimism, which is very consciously a counter to this Afro-pessimism movement. But you also root Afro-optimism into earlier moments before anyone was ever talking about Afro-pessimism. Talk about how important it was for you to frame the argument of the book as a counter to Afro-pessimism.
I don't know that I did, though. I mean, I knew I had to address it, because if I didn't mention it, then people would be like, well, it's obviously, so I felt like I had to do that. I had to do it. But in terms of Afro-optimism, the concept, I had a conversation with Leslie Guy, who's a curator, who's from Philadelphia. And when she moved to Chicago, we were having coffee, and she said, the thing about like Black Chicago is it always feels like it's on the verge of spring, like something is about to happen, right? And so I was like, how do I express that concept? So for a while, I was really digging on Robin D.G. Kelly's conception of Black radical imagination as being the thing. And then I'm like, well, let's dig a little deeper. It's actually like this optimism that is very specific. It's not Pollyanna-ish, right? It believes the potential of something because something has happened before. Like, here is proof of concept that this thing is even possible, right? So I was really leaning too much more into that than into Afro-pessimism is this, but also Afro-pessimism, my beef with it, and I will take it to the streets. Anybody who wants to come get these hands about it, I'm ready for that. My beef with Afro-pessimism is that it just is so, it's at the end of the day, it's like on the hierarchy of needs, the ability to even say to yourself that we are doomed by the fact of our Blackness is a certain type of, what is the word? Privilege, if that makes sense, right? Thinking of like people who have to get up and be inspired to do whatever they do just to make ends meet. They don't have the time to sit back and say, we're doomed by the fact of our Blackness, because what is the purpose of life? Right.
I love that. Yeah. It's funny. You mentioned Robin D.G. Kelly, and we just taped an episode with him a few days ago. And he talked about, the number of folks who've kind of reclaimed that great book, Freedom Dreams, for 20 years ago, that it keeps coming up now in contemporary conversations about thinking about Black futures. And it's funny when you said, you would be willing to take it to the street, right, to challenge those Afro-pessimism, because part of, I think the revision that you make to this idea of a radical Black imagination is the way that it exists in everyday Black life. It is not just, highbrow artists, whether it be, examples of musicians or visual artists or poets, as Robin spent some time with, but just in the fabric of everyday life, particularly in a city like Chicago.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, it's like that belief is what keeps us all here. It's what keeps us engaged. It's what keeps us tied together, right? And that was what I wanted to express in the book. And I wanted, regular people to be able to pick up this book and be affirmed and inspired and remember and learn about this legacy that's so rich, that's such a gift.
The first sentence in the first chapter, the chapter on Stony Island Avenue, creativity is a holy thing in Chicago. Unpack that for the audience.
So you watched Good Times, right?
Absolutely.
One of the things I like about Good Times, and I like a lot of things about Good Times, for all the silliness, I like the fact that, it took place in Chicago, right? And I like the fact that JJ was a visual artist and his parents believed in his art, right? They believed that he had a pathway through that art, through that creativity, that it was important. I think about that a lot because my generation, and maybe the generation directly before me, might be some of the first generations of Black kids who could go to school and major in art and whatever, and really just focus on that. And the parents may or might not have, but I mean, it was like a possibility. Right. Whereas before that, it might have felt like you could be an artist, but you better have that thing to make your money. Now, my thing with this is it's twofold. I think that you can be an artist, but you need to have a job thing, that again is not disrespecting the art. That's respecting the art, but understanding the way in which capitalism works, right? I mean, it's only just been that these museums are like taking another look at their collections, right? That galleries are trying to be more inclusive. So it's like, I'm trying to protect my children from the hardships that could be that life. But I would say, like in Chicago specifically, public art is such an important part of our culture, public art and culture. Like the murals are everywhere. Street performances, festivals in the summer are like part of our culture in a really deeply rooted way. We take an ownership of Jazz in the Alley, of Chosen Few Picnic, of Silver Room Block Party. Like all of those things are part of people's identity. I mean, I just think that we know that that vibrancy of us as a people is expressed through art and culture.
Your record collection suggests, that collection of vinyl that you have suggests that this is really a book about music, right? Or at least looks at music as a portal to look through the lives of folks and the creativity of Chicago. And I want to spend some time on, what you unpack in terms of Chicago's soul, because not only do you kind of, lay out how important the music has been in Chicago, but how Chicago really becomes part of a larger constellation for Black music, in the 60s and the 70s and well into the 80s. And I want to start with the show Reclaim Soul, about, the important service that you were doing, creating a platform and an avenue to talk to these artists, particularly ones who came earlier in the 50s and the 60s. And how important it was to be able to give them another voice, both in the show, but also in the book.
Okay. So, it's really interesting because I think there is a lot of scholarly research about music that is coming from people who are not in the culture, which is, what it is, right? Like, it's a thing, it's a whole thing. But what I realized pretty early on in my inquiry, we'll call it, when I went to talk to these people, or these people came to me, there was a certain, you look like my grandbaby connection. You know what I'm saying? Which allowed a lot more intimacy into our conversations. Like, I think that there's something special about that. The other thing that I think is valuable is I'm constantly, because it's broadcast, it's not like a podcast. It's really aimed towards anybody who has the ability to turn on the radio or turn on our stream outside of our listening area. I'm constantly thinking about multiple audiences. Yeah. So I'm like, so what's the hook for younger people? Why should they want to hear about this particular person, Otis Clay, for instance? Mm-hmm. And older people who remember Otis Clay playing at the High Chaparral back in the day. Like, what is going to be the draw for them to where it's like, oh, this is an authentic interview. This person knows what they're talking about. So how do you speak these dual languages? I think that's kind of really the thing about Reclaimed Soul, is that you can feel included in the music discovery, exploration, remembering, even if your entry point is not the same as someone else.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about the significance of Curtis Mayfield, and particularly his Curtom Records operation.
Someone just mentioned, literally this morning, I was doing a DJ gig and this guy was like, yeah, I lived across the street from a house that he used to own over 92nd and Luella, super specific. And I thought that was so funny because Curtis, out of anyone maybe, was the poet laureate of this era that we're talking about, 1960s, 1970s in Chicago. And so when he decided, after working for, a major label, ABC Records, to go solo, not just start his own solo career, but actually start a solo owned enterprise, which was Curtom, which was Curtis Mayfield and Eddie Thomas as partners. That was far out. I just, people don't know. I think the biggest artist who had done it before successfully was Sam Cooke with SAR, but he actually continued to record on the major label RCA during the time that he experimented. Right. So taking that leap that I'm going to go to was something kind of big. And I think people were really paying attention to that. But it also allowed him to be more political with what he was trying to put out there. He had less people saying, I don't know about this, we're a winner. Who is we, Mr. Mayfield, right?
Including Fred and Sam, right?
It's true. Yeah, they wanted to stick with love songs mostly. I think they enjoyed People Get Ready and some of the more gospel influenced songs, because gospel has been inherently political for as long as gospel has been gospel, right? So I think they were with that. But if you see what Curtis wound up doing with his solo recordings, you could see what direction he really wanted to go in. Some of which is not actually radio friendly, but is the sound of the street and the message that was really resonating with what the community was feeling and wanting to strive for.
A lot of younger listeners are unaware of the earliest iteration of the Impressions, which featured in terms of a lead vocalist, the great Jerry Butler, Alderman, Jerry Butler for many folks all these years. At the same time that Curtis Mayfield is doing this incredible work launching Curtom, you have the Jerry Butler Songwriters Workshop. And, you know, this book might be one of maybe two other books I've read that actually reference, right? And one of those would have been Jerry Butler's own memoir, where he talks about it. Talk about how significant the Jerry Butler Songwriters Workshop was, and some of the folks who come through that, as we talk about this larger constellation of Black music in which Chicago is such an important part.
Right. I mean, I think ultimately the biggest takeaway from that was you don't have to take things sitting down, right? So like what had happened was he had this string of hits at Mercury, which is based here in Chicago at that time, through Gamble and Huff. Maybe you've heard of them. I mean, popular. And Gamble and Huff decided, yo, we're going to go do our own thing, right? Like with Philadelphia International. And so he was sort of left in a lurch. Right.
He needed some songs.
He needed some songs. I mean, you know, it's practical purposes, right? And so he starts this songwriting workshop on Record Row, where most of the record labels, soul record labels particularly, were based on South Michigan Avenue. And folks came and, you know, like crafted and woodshedded, and a few different interesting collaborations came out of it. One of them was the songwriting team of Terry Collier, who in and of himself is great jazz folk artist. But then Larry Wade was his co-writing partner, and they came out with a lot of beautiful songs, including The Love We Had Stays on My Mind by the Dells. Another one that people maybe don't know is the song Every Time I Turn Around, Back in Love Again by LTD.
LTD, yeah.
Yeah, those songwriters came out of the workshop and they really built their craft together. So, I mean, there's a bunch of songs that came out of it, but those might be two claims to fame.
Talk about Chuck Jackson and Marvin Yancey.
So now that's so interesting because Chuck Jackson and Marvin Yancey, so much of like Chuck Jackson related to Jesse Jackson,
right?
Came from North Carolina as well. And Marvin Yancey came together also in that cohort of folks. And probably are most famous, I would argue, for their work in a group called the Independents locally.
Absolutely. I absolutely love myself.
I was going to say something else. But then also
let this be a lesson to you. Yes.
That's right. That's right. It's beautiful music, really beautiful. But then out of that, that songwriting team also was really the impetus for Natalie Cole's first rise at national prominence as a recording artist. You know, it didn't hurt that she was married to one of the songwriters, right? Like, I mean, that sort of thing happens, but that didn't mean that she didn't, you know, do her thing.
As you were doing the research on this, and again, from all these interviews also that you did with Reclaimed Soul, were any things that just frankly surprised you, right? That you really hadn't thought about before, didn't know before, that you had to include in the book?
That's the point, that had to include in the book, because there are a lot of surprises that are not in the book. They're just not in the book. You know, it's like the book is not salacious by any stretch of the imagination. It's not what that is. That's not my lane. I think the most surprising thing has historically been, and this is really what the book it tries to detail, is the interconnectivity. Like, you kind of know that this person knows this person and this is related to this thing, but some of the almost coinky-dink type things, like who would have guessed that these two things were interrelated, really like freaked me out. Like, I guess my favorite is that, I mean, purportedly, I don't know if this is just whatever, but Garland Green, the soul blues artist, was discovered playing pool at a barbecue shack and playing pool. And then the person who owned the barbecue shack overheard him and supported him going to Conservatory of Music and ultimately bankrolled the beginning of his career. Now, that's what it says on like Garland Green's album cover, but I also spoke to the Barbecue Shack person's daughter, Allison Collins, from the Collins Barbecue Dynasty. And she also said that was the case. So
yeah, you spend a lot of time actually talking about these barbecue families, right, in their stores, and in this deep connection to food and culture and food and music. How important was you to tell those stories? Because, you know, initially when first of all, unless you're from Chicago, you don't think barbecue in Chicago.
Which is why yes, it's true. I actually was under contract with the press before University of Illinois, and I knew it was time to go. And they were like, you should talk more about pizza, because people, when they think of Chicago food, they think about pizza. And I was like, you don't understand my book. You know, I think the Barbecue Shack is one of those things that sometimes is maligned, you know, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, when you look at sort of what's fancy and what's popular right now, like outside of the Black community, people are all about barbecue. It's a big thing. And really Chicago, because it doesn't have a national prominence as being a barbecue capital, I wanted to help like tell those stories. You know, I mean, the fact that we have this aquarium cooker, right, that we take for granted, this big glass smoking device. It's actually kind of cool looking, but it's something that was built in Chicago, created in Chicago. It creates a particularly like moist product. It allows you to take these rib tips and turn them into, now I don't eat pork, so I can't really describe the rib tip to you, but from what I hear, it sounds delicious. You know, my jam, I know it's really funny, it's kind of ironic, but what my jam used to be, Barbara Ann's over there on Cottage Grove used to have beef ribs. They're like Bam Bam because they're huge.
They're huge, yep.
But Jesus, Mary and Joseph, rest in peace. That place was amazing.
You mentioned the conversation that you have with someone in the book about this idea that Black Chicago doesn't have any culture, and how the person actually uses, you know, these barbecue shacks as an example of something that is not representative of Black culture. And you kind of counter that, right? Because you talk about the connection between these barbecue shacks, obviously in terms of culture, music, and things like that, but also in terms of a business infrastructure.
That's
right, in a city like Chicago.
Right. I mean, you can't tell the story of Chicago, in my estimation, of Black Chicago without talking about economic enterprise from Black business people, often families, but not exclusively, because that is who a lot of the time bankrolled things that we might not even realize. I think just keeping the economic engine afloat, right? Like that is such a crucial part of what was even possible politically, right? Like, I mean, without the backing of those hair care people, right? Like it's just a lot of things wouldn't have been possible.
Back to the music for a moment. One of the people who is having a renaissance now, almost 40 plus years, almost 50 years after his death, is Charles Stepney. And I know you've been doing some stuff around his legacy, outside of the book, but also you write about him in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And, everybody knows Minnie Riperton, right? Maybe because of her daughter, Maya Rudolph, but, real soul fans knew of Minnie Riperton, both because of her and her connection to Rotary Connection. Everybody knows about Earth, Wind, and Fire, right? But not enough people know about Maurice White's connection to Chicago, right? Earth, Wind, and Fire in some ways a kind of Memphis meets Chicago meets LA vibe.
Right.
Talk a little bit about how significant Charles Stepney was to this constellation of Black music in the 1970s. And as an aside, what his loss meant, at such a young age.
Yeah, he was 45 when he passed away. So, I mean, pretty young. He had a toddler and two older daughters that he left behind, and his wife, Ruby. I think what I loved about his work was that it just sounded so like untethered and free, right? When you think about Minnie Riperton, a lot of people were introduced to her back in the day with Perfect Angel, and it's a great record. I love that record. But I think the record that really spoke to me originally was Come to My Garden. And I was spoiled because a lot of people my age, that's not their entry gateway drug to Minnie Riperton. But Come to My Garden, if you ever find that record, it's actually fairly hard to find, but it does stream, I think now, was wholly arranged by Charles Stepney, and also involved Ramsey Lewis, who he worked closely with for many years. He also did a lot of beautiful work for the Dells. And to your point, he was credited with arranging 3 albums for them, maybe 4. It gets fuzzy because apparently, because he was under contract with Chess Records, there were some things that he did that he was not credited for. So I want to make sure like I'm on the party line. Whatever they said he did is what he did. But, you know, the year he passed away, which was 1976, he had already had one massive heart attack at the top of the year around that time. And he was working simultaneously, like on multiple projects. So like right around the time he passed away, which was the spring, late spring, he was credited with having produced and arranged Spirit by Earth, Wind, Fire, Flowers by The Emotions. There's an album by Ramsey Lewis that also came out at that time. And additionally, Salongo, that was the name of that album. And additionally, This Is Niecy, which was Denise Williams' first album, which has Free on it and a lot of great stuff. All those came out quick succession within months of each other. And I think that's proof positive of what sort of path he was on. You know, like what he, like that it wasn't like he was 45 years old, but clearly it was a new beginning and he was on the path of something. And it's unfortunate because it's all imagination, not to be trite, you know, imagination is on that album Spirit, but we don't know at the end of the day, like what wonder he would have been able to have created. And we're less for it.
And yet that last year of his life, of his career, is such a metaphor for Chicago, right? Because he was literally on, to be able to have that level of output, he was just simply on a significant kind of otherworldly hustle in that moment that just, I think, speaks to the energy that never dies, you know, that you talk about in the context of the book. We talked about the stories that you told in the book. What is the one story that you didn't get a chance to tell in the book that you wish you could have?
I mean, here's the thing. There wasn't any story that isn't in the book that I wish could have been in the book. They were excluded intentionally. Although what I will say is because the story is not wholly historical, there's also some present day things. There's present day things that are happening right now that I feel like if I hadn't like drawn the line and said, okay, we're done, it would have also been in the book. So like maybe like a cute little coda at the end of the book would have been recently, actually very recently. I met Chance the Rapper for the first time in many years. I knew him when he was a high school student, and I talk about that in the book. And I literally had not seen him in 12 years. And he comes and I give him a copy of the book and I'm like, oh, you know, you're in the book. He's like, I'm in the book. So he opens up the book and he reads the whole thing and we cry together. And what he says is, I've never heard my story told like this, you know, and I think thinking about that, like really seeing him in real time, feel how connected he was to this like lineage was really like touching for me. And because I was able to tell his story that way, it was clear that I knew even back then that he was a part of this thing. Like from the beginning, from when I met him as, you know, high school student, I was like, whether he becomes rich and famous, whether he's on a Doritos commercial, he is clearly a continuation of this energy. Yeah. And he's not the only one.
What's next for you, Ayana?
Well, there's another book that I can't talk about until I can. And I just got the okay from my publisher to do a limited run podcast about Energy Never Dies.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah.
So we'll see what goes on with that. That should be fun.
Congratulations. We've been talking with Ayana Contreras, most well known perhaps as the host of Reclaimed Soul for WBEZ and Vocalo Radio, and she's the author of the recently published Energy Never Dies, Afro-Optimism and Creativity in Chicago, published by our friends at the University of Illinois Press in 2021. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything, everything black, culture over everything, y'all, we taking it back.